The northerns beneath Atlantic chur gray skies as a Viking longship cuts through waves tall as houses. Salt spray freeze on woodens instantly planks while bare crews work with hands in temperatures that would kill sailors within most modern hours. For months at sea, these maritime warriors carried enough food to sustain entire crews across treacherous waters without a single method of refrigeration. No ice houses, no cooling chambers, no preservation technology that we would recognize today. Yet somehow, Viking expeditions lasted for weeks or even months, with crews remaining well-fed and healthy throughout journeys that spanned continents. How did Vikings preserve food during extended ocean voyages when a single spoiled meal could mean death for an entire crew? The answer reveals preservation techniques so advanced that they enabled the conquest of new worlds and the establishment of trade routes spanning from Greenland to Constantinople. Archaeological evidence from ship burials, coastal settlements, and trading posts tells a remarkable story of food technology that was centuries ahead of its time. The challenge facing Viking crews was unprecedented in maritime history. Unlike Mediterranean sailors who could make frequent port stops, Vikings often sailed for weeks across open ocean with no possibility of resupply. The North Atlantic offered no tropical islands for fresh water and provisions. Ice-locked coasts provided no opportunity for hunting or gathering. Everything needed for survival had to be carried aboard ships with severely limited storage space. Modern food science tells us that bacterial growth accelerates rapidly at temperatures between 40 and 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Viking ships, constructed entirely of wood with no insulation, experienced wild temperature fluctuations as they sailed from Arctic waters to temperate coastlines. Moisture from ocean spray created perfect conditions for mold and decay. Salt air corroded containers and compromised seals that might otherwise protect stored provisions. The answer to Viking food preservation begins with understanding what they absolutely could not do aboard their vessels. Fire, as we know from ship construction evidence, was completely prohibited during ocean voyages. This eliminated smoking, cooking, or any heat-based preservation method that later maritime cultures would develop. Vikings could not rely on daily fishing because rough seas and navigation demands left little time for food procurement. They could not depend on hunting during brief shore stops because many Atlantic crossings involved weeks without sight of land. Instead, Vikings developed preservation systems based on three revolutionary principles that would dominate food technology for centuries. First, they mastered controlled dehydration techniques that removed moisture so completely that bacterial growth became impossible. Second, they perfected salt curing methods that created hostile environments for decay-causing organisms. Third, they developed fermentation processes that actually improved food safety and nutritional value during extended storage. The scale of Viking food preservation operations becomes clear when we examine archaeological evidence from coastal processing sites. Excavations at Jorvik reveal industrial-scale fish processing facilities with specialized equipment for gutting, cleaning, and preparing thousands of pounds of seafood for ocean voyages. These weren't simple seasonal fishing camps, but sophisticated food manufacturing centers designed specifically for maritime provisioning. The primary protein source for Viking ocean voyages was dried fish prepared using techniques that modern food scientists consider remarkably advanced. Archaeological evidence from processing sites shows that Vikings developed specific methods for different fish species, each optimized for maximum preservation and nutritional retention. Cod, herring, and salmon required different preparation techniques based on their fat content, muscle structure, and natural preservation properties. The cod preparation process began with precise timing that took advantage of seasonal fat distribution in the fish. Vikings harvested cod during specific months when fat content was lowest, making dehydration more effective and reducing the risk of rancidity during storage. The fish were gutted using specialized techniques that removed all internal organs while preserving maximum muscle mass. Cleaning methods eliminated blood and other fluids that could promote bacterial growth. The drying process itself was an engineering marvel that utilized natural environmental conditions with scientific precision. Coastal drying sites were positioned to take advantage of consistent wind patterns that provided steady air circulation without excessive moisture. Wooden racks elevated fish above ground level to prevent contamination while allowing maximum airflow around each piece. The spacing between individual fish was calculated to prevent touching while ensuring efficient use of drying space. Temperature and humidity control during the drying process required sophisticated understanding of weather patterns and environmental conditions. Vikings developed techniques for protecting drying fish during unexpected rain or fog, while maintaining the air circulation necessary for proper dehydration. Adjustable covers and movable racks allowed rapid response to changing weather conditions without compromising the preservation process. The final dried fish products achieved moisture levels below 10%, creating conditions where bacterial growth was physically impossible. Chemical analysis of preserved Viking-era dried fish shows that properly prepared specimens could remain edible for over a year without refrigeration. The nutritional density of these preserved fish was actually higher than fresh fish because the dehydration process concentrated proteins and essential nutrients. But fish alone could not sustain Viking crews during extended voyages. Grain-based foods provided essential carbohydrates and additional proteins necessary for the high-calorie demands of ocean sailing. Vikings developed specialized bread and porridge preparation techniques designed specifically for long-term storage in maritime conditions. The foundation of Viking grain preservation was controlled fermentation that created acidic environments hostile to harmful bacteria while promoting beneficial microorganisms that actually improved food safety. Archaeological evidence from granaries and ship provisions shows that Vikings used specific bacterial cultures to create fermented grain products that remained stable for months without refrigeration. The fermentation process began with careful grain selection that emphasized varieties with natural preservation properties. Barley and rye were preferred over wheat because their chemical composition made them more resistant to spoilage, and more responsive grains were processed using controlled fermentation, the GR techniques that removed outer husks while preserving essential nutrients and fermentation-friendly compounds. Preparation of moisture. of fermented grain products required precise control temperature and bacterial cultures that Viking had perfected through generations of experimentation. The fur lowered pH levels to points where harmful bacteria could not survive. Lactic acid, that fermentation process created beneficial bacteria, continued to produce preservative compounds throughout the storage period. Food specialists actually improving food safety over time. The final fermented grain products took several forms optimized for different aspects of ocean voyage nutrition. Hard fermented cakes provided concentrated carbohydrates that could be eaten directly or mixed with nourishing porridge. Furred with water to create fermented pastes offered easily digestible nutrition for crew members suffering from seasickness or other health problems. Fermented drinking products provided both nutrition and safe liquid alternatives to potentially contaminated water supplies. Grain products reveals nutritional profiles, physical activity in challenging conditions. The fermentation process has archaeological analysis of preserved Viking that modern food scientists consider optimal for sustained actually increased the bioavailability of essential nutrients while creating complete protein profiles that supplemented the amino acids provided by dried fish. The combination of preserved fish and fermented grains created a complete nutritional system that could sustain Viking crews through the most demanding ocean voyages. But the preservation techniques that made these a Viking maritime food technology, storage methods, distribution systems, and consumption foods possible represented only the beginning. Strategies revealed additional innovations that would prove equally crucial for survival during extended expeditions across the most of how Vikings solved dangerous waters on Earth. The story, the fundamental challenge of feeding crews any form of refrigeration, reveals technological innovations that were centuries ahead of their time. These preservation during months-long ocean voyages without techniques enabled the maritime expansion that would reshape the medieval world and establish Viking influence from North America to the Byzantine Empire. Understood that even perfectly preserved food would spoil rapidly if exposed to salt water. These preserved foods during ocean voyages required storage systems that protected them. These voyages represented engineering solutions that wouldn't be matched elsewhere. Exposure to salt water reveals sophisticated containerization systems specifically designed for maritime food storage. Vikings developed waterproof containers using materials and construction techniques that created airtight seals capable of withstanding temperature fluctuations, contamination, and the constant motion and harsh conditions of Atlantic crossings. Archaeological evidence from the Skuldelev ship finds of withstanding weeks of ocean spray and temperature changes. These weren't simple baskets or cloth bags, but engineered storage solutions that prioritized preservation above all other considerations. The primary storage containers were constructed from specially prepared animal bladders that had been processed using techniques that modern materials science recognizes as remarkably advanced. Sheep and cattle bladders were cleaned using specific chemical treatments that removed all organic residue while preserving the natural elasticity, and water containers were stretch-proof properties of the membrane material. The preparation bacteria while maintaining structural integrity. Once cleaned and treated, these bladder process involved repeated washing with salt solutions that killed, using wooden forms that created standardized sizes. Optimed and shape-shaping process required precise timing spaces, phased for ship storage. Finished containers while ensuring reliable maximum capacity and temperature control to achieve sealing properties. Completely food, while remaining 15 pounds of preserve 5 and hold between waterproof and flexible enough to withstand the constant flex. Created multiple barriers against these containers, utilized a combination of natural materials. That foiling system, Yamamata, the saying and movement of ocean voyages, create primary closures that were then reinforced with applications of rendered animal fat that hardened into waterproof barriers. Additional protective layers used specially prepared tree resins that provided chemical resistance against saltwater corrosion. But individual containers represented only the first until the age of industrialization. Viking ship designers' moisture infiltration. Sinew thread was used to level of Viking food storage technology. Archaeological evidence shows that Vikings developed systematic organization methods that maximized storage efficiency, while ensuring extended food safety throughout. With specific zones, areas within ship holds were designages, storage for different food types, each optimized for the preservation requirements of particular provisions. Dried fish storage areas with maximum ventilation to food containers could compromise preservation. These zones prevent moisture accumulation. That above BIL were positioned in ship sections, utilized raised platforms that elevate water-stored provisions while allowing air circulation around all spacing between containers was calculated to prevent temperature bill in properly preserved foods. Dupe that could accelerate spoilage. Even fermented grain storage required different environmental conditions that, through ingenious Vikings achieve elation control systems. These storage flow to prevent excessive zones were positioned away from direct aired spare clothing, and sail stability was maintained through insulation techniques that utilized drying that could damage fermented products. Temperature material to create consistent environmental planning to prevent contamination while maintaining preservation. Stored food during voyages required careful conditions. The distribution system for accessing that Vikings designated specific crew effectiveness. Archaeological evidence suggests members as food handlers who were responsible for opening contamination. Food distribution to minimize exposure to outside. Followed rotational systems to strict protocols, designed containers and distributing provisions according that ensured older provisions were consumed before newer supplies, preventing spoilage through extended storage. The rotation protocols required detailed knowledge of preservation timelines for different food types and storage conditions. Crew members responsible for food distribution needed to assess the condition of stored provisions and make decisions about consumption priorities based on signs of deterioration. Portion control during ocean voyages represented another crucial aspect of Viking food management that went far beyond simple rationing. Archaeological analysis of preserved Viking food remains shows that portions were calculated to provide specific nutritional profiles optimized for the physical demands of ocean sailing. The portion sizes weren't arbitrary. but were based on sophisticated understanding of caloric requirements under different weather conditions and sailing demands during storms or periods of intense sailing activity. Portion sizes increased to provide additional calories needed for the increased physical crews could rest. Portions were reduced to extend supplies demands. During calm weather or periods when the ioning system required constant assessment of weather conditions while maintaining adequate nutrition. This dynamic rat-dried fish was often ground into powder using specialized tools, stored provisions more palatable under difficult conditions. Innovations that maximize nutritional value while making methods for preserved foods during voyages reveal additional sailing requirements and remaining supplies. The consumption and mixed with fermented grain pastes to create nutri-weather. Fermented grain products were easier to digest during seasickness or rough and dense combinations that were frequently mixed with small to increase caloric density and improve amounts of stored fat or oil palatability. These combinations creative food chemistry techniques required knowledge water for preparation. The mixing nutrition while using minimal fresh complete meals that provided balance that ensured nutritional compatibility while preventing combinations that might accelerate spoilage. Water for preparation and consumption. But foods required specific amounts of fresh food systems. Preserve management represented the final crucial element of Viking maritime voyages. Vikings extended ocean preservation challenges during freshwater storage. Presented its developed water treatment and storage techniques that ensured safe drinking water remained available throughout systems utilized many of the same container dishes lasting several months. The water storagization principles developed for food preservation, but with additional treatments designed specifically for liquid storage. Water containers were treated with materials that prevented algae growth while maintaining water quality over extended periods. The treatment processes create that inhibited bacterial growth without a table for consumption, these making water unpalled slightly acidic conditions. Comprehensive food preservation and storage systems enabled Viking maritime expeditions that would have been impossible using any other contemporary food technology. The combination of advanced preservation techniques, sophisticated storage systems, and careful consumption management created sustainable food supplies the most challenging waters on Earth. Voyages across that supported crews during the next time you open your refrigerator or check your freezer. Remember that the convenience you take for granted was impossible for the maritime warriors who crossed the Atlantic 5 centuries before Columbus discovered America. Vikings didn't need electric cooling systems because they had developed something far more remarkable: a complete understanding of natural preservation forces that modern food science has only recently begun to appreciate. These weren't primitive sailors making do with crude techniques. They were sophisticated food engineers who solved preservation challenges that would stump modern expedition planners. Their controlled dehydration methods achieved moisture levels that industrial food processing struggles to match. Their fermentation techniques created nutritional profiles that contemporary sports nutrition science recognizes as optimal for sustained physical performance. Their storage systems protected provisions through conditions that would destroy modern packaged foods within days. Viking food preservation technology enabled the maritime expansion that reshaped the medieval world. They reached Greenland, established colonies in North America, and created trade networks spanning from the Arctic Circle to the Mediterranean Sea. They achieved all of this while maintaining crew health and nutrition standards that many modern expeditions cannot match, despite access to advanced refrigeration and processing equipment. When harsh conditions challenge your next outdoor adventure or camping trip, when your power goes out during a storm, when you face any situation where modern conveniences fail, remember that Vikings created complete food systems using nothing but natural materials and environmental forces. They didn't just survive the impossible. They engineered solutions that turned survival into conquest, hunger into strength, and environmental challenges into technological innovation that would influence food preservation for